So now, we finally come to the last of the Hammer Dracula films. At least that I'm going to do. Well, I do have Brides of Dracula. I'll get to that eventually when I do my random standalone Hammer films. But I'm not doing Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires because Christopher Lee's not in it. It's not the main reason. Does have Peter Cushing, so it does continue. But from what I've read and heard, it's not mandatory for the series. It's only part of the series if you want it to be. I'm not into martial arts films, so I'm not in any hurry to see it. I don't own it. I don't feel like going out to get it. So other than Brides of Dracula, which I'll do at some point, because I do have a small handful of other Hammer films I want to do, this will be the last one. This is the last one in the series for me, anyway. And that is the Satanic Rites of Dracula. And even though I owned the film by itself, I'd rather hold this up because not only am I a stickler for original cover art, but this is god-awful. I absolutely hate this cover for everything it's worth. I mean, what do I expect for buying a Hammer film for $4? But, I mean, look at it. This is the alpha video release from 2003. This looks like the kind of DVD you would find of an old movie in like a $1.97 bin at a gas station. That's what this reminds me of. Just, what a fucking horrible ass cover. And of course, as you can imagine, it is as bare bones as it gets. But so Satanic Rites of Dracula came out in 1973. It was directed by Alan Gibson, who directed the previous film, Dracula AD, 1972. Screenplay by Don Houghton, however you pronounce it, who wrote the previous film. It features a number of the same cast members as the previous film. Of course, Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. Also, Michael Coles, I think Freddie Jones, Joanna Lumley, which actually, Joanna Lumley was one of the big changes because she replaced Stephanie Beacham as Jessica Van Helsing. And, you know, this film was rated R again. Some small facts that I've heard about this film and noticed was, while Hammer liked to have, you know, well-endowed women, voluptuous women, usually with their at least cleavage showing, Joanna Lumley, I guess, has a very modest bust, I guess you would say. And she's modestly dressed, like she's not exposed as much as other women. I think that was I don't know if that was something with the actress or just a creative choice they made. There's not really a whole lot about the making of it. I mean, this is one of the two films. Maybe the next one was the same way. But I know AD 1972 and at least this was one of the ones that was put out by Warner Brothers. So I think they had a lot of say in some of the stuff they were going to do. In fact, the original working title for the film, which sounds really stupid, was Dracula is Dead, ... and well and living in London. Which there was it's a parody of a play and film called Jacques Brel is Alive and Well Living in Paris. Okay. That was the working title. Christopher Lee hated it. You know, he said, quote, he said he wouldn't even be in the film if that was the title. He says, I'm doing it under protest. I think it's fatuous. I can think of 20 adjectives. Fatuous, pointless, absurd. It's not a comedy, but it's got a comic title, and I don't see the point. Which Christopher Lee had been disinterested in Dracula since his first sequel, Prince of Darkness. But he always came back. They always found a way to get him back. He always loved Dracula, but he didn't see the point in the films he was doing. And this would be his last. At least for Hammer. I do know there was, I think it was a made-for-television film. I don't remember who made it, but it was called Bram Stoker's Count Dracula, unrelated to Hammer. This would be the last time Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing worked together on a Hammer production. Mainly because Hammer was on its way out. I mean, this was 1973. I think they finally stopped around 78. But between 74 and 77 or 78, they only produced, I think, less than 5 films. So this was really one of the last nails in the coffin. I mean, no pun intended. There was this, Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell, which was released in 74. Hammer was on its way out. But they would work together again 10 years later. I can't remember the name of the film. House of the Long Shadows, which is a film I really want to see. It was produced by it is a Cannon film, but it has Vincent Price, Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, and John Carradine. That's a film I'm interested in getting at some point. So yeah, they changed the title to the French title, Dracula vit toujours et Londres. Translated to Dracula is Still Living in London. In the US, there was a heavily edited version called Count Dracula and His Vampire Bride. And like AD 1972, which this one is a direct sequel to. Of course, in Hammer tradition, they don't explain how Dracula came back. They're just like, it's not like Friday the 13th where they come up with all these stupid reasons. Sometimes they do, but other times it's just like, fuck it, just have him come back. It is set in contemporary 70s. I think the Golden Vampires one is as well, but again, I'm not interested in seeing that. But, this film also, this wrapped on January 3rd, 1973, shooting, which was 15 years to the day that production for Horror of Dracula wrapped, the first film in the series. That's probably the most interesting thing about this fucking movie. If you saw my review for AD 1972, it was the only Hammer film, I think that was a Rant. I don't think there was a Frankenstein film that was a Rant. This one's going to be a Rant as well. It's a slight improvement over 72, but not by much. I mean, it's a mixture of a number of different things. I mean, where the next film is a mixture of Hammer vampire film, this one is a mixture of, Hammer vampire horror, but also science fiction and spy thriller, because James Bond was big at the time. Christopher Lee would go on to play a Bond villain in the 70s. The film, The Man with the Golden Gun. So, espionage films were big. And this movie is all over the place. Tone, genre-wise, plot holes aplenty. I mean, it opens up with this satanic ritual. Also, this one guy who's beaten up. He's like a special agent. He's held in this house and he has to get out. He strangles this one guy. Which, when he strangles the one guy, that's like the only bit of score that I would say I actually liked or even noticed. Because the score was composed by John Kakavas. He's mostly known for television. But, so yeah, this Secret Service agent played by Maurice O'Connell escapes from this country house where there's this ritual. He has these photos of these 4 political dignitaries. And then, you know, I guess he hangs himself or someone kills him. That's the thing. I have sat down and watched this movie about 4 or 5 times since some day last week. I have fallen asleep every time. Usually when I say that, it's because I'm tired from work and I just don't have the energy to watch a movie. It's not because of the film itself. This one was. This is boring as sin. It's all over the fucking place. The only part of the film that's even worth a damn watching is like the last 15, 20 minutes or so. Because that's the only part that feels like a Dracula film. Again, Dracula just comes back. So, the guy that's put on the case to find out about this cult with these important people that are involved is Inspector Murray, played by Michael Coles, who's reprising his character from the previous film. Now, Michael Coles, I will say, which is that guy, he's alright. He's got some sort of charm and charisma to him. The thing that made me like him the most doesn't even have anything to do with his acting, but sort of his voice, the way he's got like that 70s shaggy hair, and how he looks. He reminds me of like a, this is going to sound disrespectful, but you know, like a generic brand or like a knockoff or a 2-bit version of David Warner. Wonderful character actor. I mean, he worked with Polanski. He was the photographer in The Omen, which is one of my favorite films. Top 10 favorite films. David Warner is one of my favorite actors. And, you know, he kind of looked and sounded a little bit like David Warner, so that kind of kept me going. He's on the case, and I'm not going to get too heavy into plot because it's all over the fucking place, and it's confusing. There's plot holes. I'm already 13 minutes in, and the film doesn't really deserve that much. I will say Peter Cushing, he's always great, but I will say AD 1972 wasn't one of his strongest. This is an improvement. He really, even though he's still a descendant of Van Helsing, this felt more akin to the real Van Helsing that he played in the older films. Whereas you can tell he's playing a different character in the last film. This, you know, it was a return to form. He was on his A game. I guess there's this plan that Dracula wants to release this new strain of the bubonic plague and wipe out everyone on the planet except for his Van Helsing's niece, or excuse me, granddaughter, Jessica. And he wants Peter Cushing, because you have like prime minister, councilman. You have like these three very powerful guys, and you have Van Helsing. They're going to be the four horsemen of death, essentially, for Dracula. That's going to spread this bubonic plague across the world and wipe everyone out except for Jessica Van Helsing. Which doesn't make sense because, you know, whose blood is he going to drink? And eventually he's going to run out. There's even a point where I think Van Helsing kind of questions this plan, and Dracula kind of has this look of, oh, well, shit. Well, let's still do it. There's things this film does, like these cops come across this house with all these chained up vampire women. They get scared and they leave, and that's the end of it. They don't call for reinforcements. They don't do anything. They don't even mention it. There's a part where the cult tranquilizes Van Helsing. And, you know, it's the Cult of Dracula, which would have been a better title. So they should know that throughout the ages, you know, Van Helsing and Dracula, they've always been two forces against each other. The greatest enemy. Why didn't they just kill him? But of course, that's something they actually do answer, because Dracula says death is too good. He needs to suffer both physically, emotionally, you know, he needs to have the worst death. Which, by knowing he's part of the world's destruction, and he says he's not gonna, he talks about how his granddaughter's body will be uncorrupted. I guess that means she's gonna stay virgin and she's not gonna get the virus, but he's still gonna turn her into a vampire. This movie's so all over the place, I don't really care anyway. I will say the gore effects, I mean, there's a part where when he says, "You are all my horsemen of, you know, the apocalypse," they start questioning. They're like, well, wait, we're just supposed to use this for, like, government control and stuff like that, and, like, a threat. So he uses his hypnotic gaze to make one guy break the vial. And we see the virus kind of spread over him. The effects look great. Of course, the bacteria and that one guy burn in the house fire because the house catches on fire. And then there's the ending, which it sounds like too many ideas put together. If this review for this film sucks and I'm not talking about a lot, it's just because there's not a lot there. I'm sorry. There's not a lot worth talking about, and I just really was not into this film. And God, I hate holding this up because I hate this fucking cover. There is a point where, because, yeah, Hammer has come up with many ways to kill Dracula. This is one of the more crazy ones, but I can see where they're going with it. Cushing comes across this hawthorn bush, which is a certain kind of thorn bush that's related to, you know, it's in the same family as a rose. Now, Bram Stoker's novel, we know that roses keep vampires at bay. In Serbian and Croatian vampire folklore, they say that the wood from the stake used to kill a vampire must be made from the hawthorn wood of the hawthorn bush. So, Cushing, as Van Helsing, he comes across this bush, and Dracula's over here. So he calls upon Dracula, who's now looking for him, and Dracula kind of gets this look like, I've got you now, and he just walks through the bush. But if we're trying to establish that the wood and the thorns from the hawthorn bush is harmful to vampires, wouldn't Dracula know that I can't walk through this bush? Like, something is not working well for me. Like, I can tell what kind of wood this is. But no, he does it anyway. And what would have made it work is he then just grabs a road sign, I think just made out of wood, and just stabs it through his heart. Because the thorn bushes, as you can see on the cover here, it does weaken him. It does cut him up. It does weaken him. Which, I guess Christopher Lee really did get scratched up while doing that scene. So it's like, oh, okay, so that's the wood he has to use, or that really is lethal to vampires, but then he just grabs a fucking regular old sharp piece of wood and stabs it through him. And I will say, because then he dissolves into like a corpse and like a skeleton and then dust. And it is more like one of those crossfade kind of transition cuts, like Wolfman transformation, or earlier films of Dracula when it shows him dying or coming back to life. This is one of the best ones since the original, when he crumbles into dust from the sunlight. I thought, the rotting corpse on Dracula, the makeup or whatever they used looked really good. But that's really all this fucking film has going for it. It's no surprise this would be Christopher Lee's final outing as Dracula, at least for Hammer, and that they didn't go on to do much after, except for one film. Sort of like Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell, but I actually somewhat enjoyed that movie way more than this. They didn't really do much with the contemporary setting, except for like, okay, yeah, we have cars, we're using computers, we're talking about, using some sort of biology. Also, I thought it was weird how in the credits there's like a silhouette of Dracula starting off down here, and it just gets bigger throughout the opening credits. The film is all over the place with, it doesn't blend the genres very well. The tone is all over the place. The plot holes are like someone drove a stake right through the fucking script. I mean, Lee's performance during the last 10 minutes or so, Peter Cushing's performance, they were on their A game. Michael Cole's kind of had like a David Warner thing going on that I liked. And then what gore and blood effects they did use, I thought was decent to pretty good. The film itself, really not great at all. I was not a fan of it. I would say slight improvement because the pacing was a little better than in 72. But that's not saying much. So yeah. The two films, directed and produced by Alan Gibson and written by Don Houghton, the two 70s films, are definitely the weakest low points of the series. I enjoyed them all up until Scars of Dracula, but then when they brought him into the 70s with 72 in this, I thought they were pretty damn bad. So yeah, Satanic Rites of Dracula, not a good movie at all. And for now, that finally concludes and wraps up the Hammer Dracula series. So, thank you for sticking with me through all that. And now I can go on to something else. I know I have more Hammer films. I still have my Universal films to do. But I got just a bunch of everything that I got to get to. So, we'll see what happens next. But anyway, thank you for watching.